Ever since generative AI exploded on the scene, business leaders have been eager to adopt and see the ROI that's been promised. But there's been a lot of roadblocks along the way, from cybersecurity concerns to having clean and available data, even employee training. So I sat down with our top Insight technical talent and our leader of business strategy to find out what business leaders need to do in order to clear the path and see and surpass what's possible. So here at Insight, we've been following AI and the generative AI journey for its years. If we talk about AI, it's obviously been around for a long time. We did a pulse survey early in 2023 to find out where companies are, paced with adoption of generative AI, how they're feeling about it. And then we did a follow-up survey with some different questions back in October to find out how that adoption is going and how use cases are coming across businesses. Are they starting to see a return from this investment? So before we jump into those survey results, I'd like to just kind of remind everybody now, again, this has been a topic we've been talking about for a long time, but Juan, I'd like to know from you specifically, where do you feel like we really are on the generative AI hype cycle today?
It's a great question, and we've done a number of engagements with our clients. We've spent quite a bit of time with our industry peers and the providers, and we're generally landing in that 2023 was the year when we tried things out and evaluated whether it was possible and what's possible. So it was more of the year of what's possible rather than let's go do something. And most of our clients are still in that stage. We believe that 2024 is going to be the year where we actually start deploying into production the real use cases that our clients are exploring through these experimentations that we've been doing through 2023.
Perfect. And like I said, we did a survey to find out really how that adoption is going, how companies have embraced it. Before we talk about some of the numbers, Mike, you continuously engage with clients. All of you are very involved in the generative AI strategies here that we're implementing at Insight and a lot of our new solutions that we're coming out with. Mike, from your conversations with clients, where do you feel like companies really are with generative AI today?
Yeah, I'm kind of building on Juan's point. I think we're kind of coming out of what I call the phase of irrational exuberance, where people got a little overexcited about how it was going to transform their business on Tuesday. And we're getting into the mode of which are the real use cases we're going to actually do. Most of what I see happening today in the clients is, I'll call it internal use cases. So they're using it for things like visualizing data and analytics, or they're using it to do content summarization and help their employees be more productive. I think the other shift that we'll see in 2024 is they'll begin to shift more towards customer-facing use cases where they're deploying AI in ways either embedded in applications or as things like chatbots that change how they engage with customers or enable them to actually launch new services and new revenue streams with customers.
So according to this survey, roughly 2 out of 3 organizations say that they've deployed some sort of generative AI in-house. There's still a great deal of barriers, however. One of the biggest concerns that they had was actually security at 38%. And then that was closely followed by employee knowledge or training on generative AI tools as 32%. So again, the biggest barrier for really expanding generative AI adoption seems to be security concerns and employee training and adoption. Carm or Juan, from a security standpoint, what do you think those top concerns are and what's the best way to address those?
So I'll get started, Carm, and then maybe you can jump in. So there's a few broad categories of security concerns. One is, hey, is this model providing me data that is accurate and secure, and it's not doesn't have hallucinations? That's one model. Another one is on the training itself. Has this model been trained on a data set that allows me to actually consume it without creating a challenge for myself as an organization, legally or otherwise? Then there's some, actually, and Carm can dive into this quite a bit, some sophisticated attacks that have been published in both academia and in the wild, where you can inject malicious data into the training data set so that you can as an attacker, have something give you the wrong permissions or give you access to things that are inappropriate or create a poison pill of some sort that could negatively impact the public appearance of organizations. So there's a lot of these concerns that are out there. And Carm, maybe you can dive into that plus the other things that you're tracking.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a good point, Juan. And I think across the board, it's one of the things that organizations didn't really know in the early days. And as Mike was talking about earlier, we really thinking about this as something new, right? So it's a new technique, new capability. But in essence, it really just represented another service that people were going to use. So the large language model is thought of as a service, providing productivity gains for the organization. But we have to think about how do we use our data with it. So from a security perspective, all of the things that we thought about from that perspective before, which were things like, do I have to worry about someone intercepting my data stream? One of the things Juan was alluding to was what's called prompt injection. So prompt injection means that someone can intercept your prompts and then be able to change them, tailor them, or basically make the large language model do something you didn't anticipate. So those becomes problems for us. But if you think about it from the perspective of sort of our existing capabilities, like we did a really good job historically of encrypting the data streams, of auditing who communicates with whom across the board. And if we treat large language model or generative AI as a service, then we at least have a technique that allows us to be able to ensure that these kinds of injection attacks or interception of the data doesn't occur. But then secondarily, the important point is also responsible AI, ethical AI, what data is being used to make decisions. And it sort of moves now to the which data is being used from a security and a privacy perspective to influence the model, and then for which purposes is it being used. So there's also a security component of it that's related to that. So who's authorized to use it and for what purposes? And it goes a little bit beyond that, which I think is why that number was so high, because there's a lot of things that impact what we call security these days, but it includes, I think, privacy as well as responsible AI, which is a whole nother topic, which we won't get into in general, but it's becoming a very important concept to think about, as the rest of the team has been talking about. When we start to move into productionalization, these actual use cases, we need to make sure that we take these into account. And so I think we'll be getting there also in 2024.
So in a practical sense, if I can add on top of that, Carm, here's a simple example of one of the concerns that clients have is that if you do some of these techniques where you enhance or adapt a public model to make it more fit to your purpose, you typically either embed capabilities or fine tune it or do things like RAG or one of many other techniques. If you do that at wholesale across all of your information in your organization, you might be exposing sensitive data to unauthorized internal users. So as an example, if you train it on your financial data, do you want somebody that's in accounting or even worse, like in sales, getting access to your private accounting information? You probably do not. And there's a lot of concerns around how do you limit what is exposed to which users and how do you tie that into roles, access controls, and all the typical stuff that we've done forever in IT, but in this new capability where it's being kind of mushed into this brain that doesn't really explain how it thinks. So there's a lot of those kinds of things.
The other top barrier they cited was following employee knowledge or training on generative AI tools. But what's interesting is that we also asked, how have you deployed employee training? And 72% say that they have. So if a majority of them have deployed employee training, yet employee understanding is a barrier, what's the gap? What's missing? Or maybe how are we not doing it the proper way? You're all smiling, so you all have strong opinions about this.
I think it's more than whatever they did, a 2 or 3 hour training session, and presto, you understand how to employ AI, how to structure prompts, what are the good use cases. It's, I always use this stupid analogy that giving someone a hammer does not make them a carpenter, and that's kind of what we've done with AI. We've given them this tool and we've given them 2 hours of training, and they're not an expert on AI. They're just a dude with a hammer.
Yeah, I think just like we don't give everybody tools directly, right? So if I don't know anything about a car, nobody's going to give me a spanner and say, here's a manual, read it, open it up, and put it back together, right?
Is that
That's
like a
not.
wrench?
It's actually even worse
Yes.
than that.
Yes,
Amol.
right. But
Amol, your point is exactly right, because here's the challenge that we're running into, is that there is no manual. This stuff is being made up on the fly, and it's changing so rapidly that if a user asks us for a manual for how to use one of these AI-enabled capabilities, there is no such thing. And if you go look at things like Copilot or Firefly or any of the AI augmented tools that are out there, there's new features that are being dropped almost on a daily basis. So whatever training gets done needs to be updated or modified or whatever. The real problem is what we have now have created is a fundamentally different way of interacting with computers. In the past, the way we programmed or interacted with them is we clicked on something that was there every time, or we programmed it in a very defined predetermined language like a Python or C# or any of those programming languages. The way we interact with a computer now with these capabilities is by talking to it in English. But it's very important that you talk in the right way, because if you don't, it's going to give you the wrong answer, because it doesn't really think. It kind of predicts. That's all it really does.
Let me take the educator perspective on this one. So I'll come at it from the transfer learning side of it, and you guys are alluding to this as well. So it's really, if you don't practice it, then it's not going to really take hold. And when you do have a changing underlying capability, then you also have to worry about how do you remain agile and modify the way in which you interact with these large language models if you're going to go that path. But in general, I think it also comes down to understanding what the capabilities are and setting the expectations properly. So when we train people, we need to understand how to craft the type of response that you're expecting, so that the prompt engineering, if you are interacting with a chatbot, for example, you can help to control it. And I think that's really what we need to teach people, is understand what the capabilities of the large language model are, understand how to represent the English language, because it is a language model at the end of the day, to Juan's point. So how do you just, make sure that people understand how to craft the right kind of context to ask your question, and then how to understand the response so that you know whether or not it matched your expectations correctly, without assuming that it's always truthful, because, nobody mentioned hallucinations yet, but we all know they're out there. So I think that that's really part of it. It's not so much just saying, take a training and off and go. It's kind of like when you learn how to drive. It's like, yeah, you take a test maybe and you learn how to drive, but unless you practice, you really don't know how to drive. And so that's, it just takes time. You have to practice and then get better at it and then adapt. And that's really the key. That's where learning has to go, I think, over time.
Different opinion here in the sense that, we are talking about LLMs and we're talking about all of these services. Most of the users that the training is for, they don't actually need to be trained on that. That is where the application comes into play, and the application should be intuitive enough that whenever they interact with the application, that application translates whatever the input is into the right actions for the LLM. So whether it's the right prompt, how to speak to the LLM, all of that actually is behind the scenes and should be behind the scenes. Right now, when customers or anybody are talking about generative AI, they have this application in mind, like ChatGPT or the simple conversational style of an application, and that is why everything goes to that. Like, how can I ask the right question? How do I change the prompt? What kind of? Yes, that's one way of interacting with it, but that's not the only application. And so when it comes to the enterprises, the customers and different use cases, if you look around, the applications are going to be key, and that user interface will change. It'll still be natural language, but everything that we are talking about that the user should be trained on in terms of LLMs and understanding prompts, this is my opinion. I don't think they need to know. I think the applications have to translate what they're talking about into what the LLMs require and how they should be spoken to. And so I think there's a difference. So even if we give them hours and hours of training, it's not going to help. That is where I was going with the first point, is you have a wrench and you have this, that doesn't mean that I know how to do it, right? But if I ask a mechanic to say, hey, I'll give you XYZ, can you fix this? They know how to do it. Now, I've just spoken to them in plain English, but they know how to speak to that car in terms of changing stuff, right? So that is the analogy.
A real world example.
Yeah, the only thing.
Go ahead, Carm.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just going to add to what he was saying, and I completely agree with you. And one of the areas that we do focus on is AI-enabled applications. But I think this is really interesting because I think to an extent, for a certain part of the population, and Juan brought this point up earlier, and we're all talking about it. The fact that we can communicate with a large language model by using just English alone means that we can have a unique exploratory experience with a large language model. So there is a group of the population or the business teams that do want to interact at that level that you maybe can't prescribe the specific use case as much. So I think that there's probably two groups. One is the one you're talking about, Amol, which I completely agree with. It's like we don't have to train everybody. We have to sort of set context and then leverage these capabilities. And we'll see a lot of that as well. But also sort of the art of the possible exploratory side of it is teach the people that will actually interact. And I think it's just amazing because they don't have to be programmers anymore. They really just have to know how to express their expectations using English language or whatever language they want to use with translation. So I think it's a good point. Yep.
So Carm, on that note, I'm sorry, one more thing. We have been exploring. We've been exploring the large language models, which is by almost by definition language spoken, all right? But this generative AI is actually a technology that enables lots of other modalities. So audio, video, images, and every one of those has a slightly different interactivity and a slightly different way of programming or using or consuming that capability. And that's part of the challenge that we're running into is that it's fairly easy to teach any one of those things, but as all of these modalities come out and become more pervasive in the applications and the ways we interact with computers, we're going to have to change the interaction models across all of those things, and typically multiple at the same time. And that's part of the challenge that we're running into as well.
Mike, I think you've got the floor now.
Thank you, Jillian. I was just going to give an example that I thought about. So there's a healthcare provider that we've done some interesting work with, and the problem they were trying to solve is how do I make medicine more personalized? In this case, it was around hypertension or high blood pressure. So how do I come up with a treatment that is specific to Mike or specific to Amol, not just generic based on their symptoms? And we helped them build out the data platform. We actually, in this case, it was machine learning, not generative AI, but came up with some really interesting results around tailoring the type of medication and the dosage to the patient, and they got much better health outcomes for it. But it was really kind of in a pilot mode, and what we're doing now, to the point Carm raised, is embedding it into an application. In this case, it's their Epic healthcare records management system. Until they do that, you don't unleash the value of it to the clinicians that are going to be actually using this data to improve patient care. So I think this notion of AI getting embedded into applications that change the way either their employees and or their customers interact with the company, that's when you're going to see another generation. And maybe to tee up another related topic. So we talked a lot about is the talent in the organization have the knowledge and skills to do the AI. I think there's another big hurdle, and that's the data, right? So whether it's generative AI or machine learning or other forms of AI, they learn by consuming lots and lots of data. And if your data estate is not in a condition that's conducive to being consumed for learning, you're going to get paltry results out of your AI initiative. So the other thing we see, and Carm's much deeper in this than I, is companies having to actually modernize their data platforms before they're ready to truly take advantage of the capabilities of AI.
Yeah. Definitely getting ahead of the conversation, but we'll get there.
Sorry.
Just a final takeaway before we move on, though. It sounds like the consensus is businesses need to think strategically about their user groups and really clarify and specify the training for who are the technical folks that need to be doing the behind the scenes, and who are your layman users who just need to know, how can I get our internal Insight GPT to help me craft a better email or something? Yes?
That's
Yeah,
exactly
I think
right.
so. If you do want to classify or categorize users, they're the developers, right, behind the scenes who are doing all the actual work. Then there are power users, like Carm mentioned, who need to understand a little bit more about generative AI so they can craft the prompts so that they get the results. Is more if you're exploring the data or you're exploring that functionality, then you need to know that. And then you have your just users who just want to get their job done and move on. So they don't really care about generative AI or LLMs or how it works, or is it Azure OpenAI or Open. They don't really care. They just want to go in, do something, and get out. And so for them, these are, that is how I see it, is the applications enable these. Then there are different applications that will enable the power users to explore that technology. And then there are the back-end, actual developers who understand data science, who understand data estates, who understand large language models, who make all of this happen for them.
Yep, perfect. So another barrier, although much lower on the list, 15% cited ongoing maintenance costs, initial infrastructure, as you alluded to. So those are big investments, and managing outdated technology infrastructure. Those are all other key barriers to really integrating and adopting generative AI. So Mike, from a strategic perspective, how are leaders thinking about their budgets? We're coming into another interesting fiscal year, but how are they kind of thinking about, how do I prioritize addressing some of those initial challenges and clearing the path to get to this adoption?
Yeah, maybe a couple areas. One is the data platform piece I just spoke about, right? So that's a big priority for a lot of our customers today, is to get their data estate in order so that they can take advantage of it. So they may be adopting new architectures, new tools, new policies and governance models for their data to get it into the condition where they can actually use it for AI. And then the second big thing, as you alluded to, is more on the infrastructure side. If you need GPU-enabled compute, and are you going to put that in your private cloud, or are you going to leverage a public cloud? And right now, there's things that companies are wrestling with, like long lead times for. If you want to purchase GPU-enabled compute right now, you're looking at many months, if not over a year, in terms of lead time. So, what do you do in your private cloud? What do you do in your public cloud? And how do you address some of those kinds of challenges?
Guys on the phone, yeah, go ahead, Carm.
No, I was just going to add to that a little bit, because I think it's a really important point about the data estate. So that I don't think it's a new concern as it relates to the data estate. So, we've been doing analytics for, decades at this point. And I think organizations knew that the quality of their reporting or the analytics that they would use was always related to the quality of data that they had behind it. I think here now we may even be helping organizations to be able to create the business case that is associated with, if you spend time working on the governance and quality of your data, then it will pay dividends in your generative AI capabilities or direct impact to the business from that perspective. So I think it becomes even more of a priority within organizations, so that they can say, you are going to see the benefit of making investments in the curation and governance of your data by going down this path. And, as Mike had mentioned, we've seen this over the course of the last year. Organizations get to the point where they're like, why isn't this Gen AI working the way we expected it to? Well, partially it's because of the data that you're using to set the context for the Gen AI is not well curated, or it's not well imputed, or wasn't curated very well. And so we have discussions with customers about it. And I think the other thing is that, which is really interesting, I've been having lots of conversations with customers now. So we can actually even use AI, Gen AI, to help to improve the quality of that data. So the lift may not be as heavy as many organizations think. So I think it does become a priority, and we can also, sort of reduce the barrier to entry that allows them to be able to do that effectively.
So companies that have really been on top of their data, their infrastructure, those are the ones, it sounds like, are best equipped to have generative AI or any sort of AI solutions today and get ahead and really demonstrate the art of what's possible. But it sounds like in many organizations, there's a lot of kind of preemptive work, some training that needs to happen. And I don't mean employee training, but I mean like getting your business in shape to do this. So Maybe, Juan, from your perspective, what would you say are kind of the top 3 priorities that businesses need to address this year in order to get to a competitive state when it comes to generative AI?
Well, so first and foremost is to understand where you're focusing your energies around these generative AIs. And I use 3 buckets to describe what we've been talking about here in a different way. There's going to be a set of AI efforts where you're creating AI models from scratch. Those are going to require a lot of the compute resources Mike talked about, a lot of the data scientists and data estate things that Amol and Carm talked about. Not many organizations are going to focus on that because that is extremely expensive and time consuming. The other end of it is where you use AI or consume AI as a feature within a product. And this is what Amol was talking about, where you don't really know that it's AI in the background. It's just a new capability, but it does require that change in training, and you're going to have to focus on that. And then there's this in between, what I call adapt AI, where you're taking something that's been pre-created. So a foundational model built by somebody like an Anthropic or an OpenAI or a Google, adapt it to your business need and then expose it to your users. But in order to do that, you are going to need to have that data estate cleaned up, as Mike mentioned, in order to be able to adapt it and then make sure that it's secured and governed and all that. So make sure that you're focusing on one of those 3 and you're being purposeful. It would be my first and foremost advice. And then beyond that, it's literally just to make sure that as you go through this, you iterate, start small, focus on something that you think will bring a lot of business value, verify that it is as you engage in it, and iterate through that.
Perfect. We talked a lot early on during generative AI of like the pressure and the heat from like stakeholders of asking CEOs like, what's our generative AI strategy? Everybody wanted to know how businesses were going to use this. I'm curious from your perspectives, because Mike, you really are representing us from the business strategy side of the house. Amol, you're behind the scenes making the stuff that people are asking for and building these solutions to make them work. So do you feel like the C-suite is in step with the technology teams that are making it happen? Like, is the communication clear on, what you're asking for and what are the limitations to make that happen? What's your feeling?
So my perspective on this is that because of the hype and so many articles and so many people talking about it, there is a little bit of disconnect. Because then I think the leaders feel that, well, it's generative AI, and it's, you can do code generation, and you can do this, and I can answer questions. So why isn't it done already? It's like 2 weeks, why isn't it done? But no, it takes effort. You still have to write a lot of code, test it, do all of the stuff that needs to be done. And I think just from a capability point of view, we've had questions come in, was like, I uploaded this file and I asked a question, why isn't it automatically formatted in this way? It's generative AI. It's like, that's not how it works, right? It'll tell you, it'll give you a content back, but then you actually have to update the application to visualize it that way, right? So there is a lot of nuance to it. And because of all the media and a little bit of hype, there is a little bit of disconnect between what people expect out of a solution and how soon it should come to market versus what it actually is, right? At the end of the day, you're still building software. So the rigor that comes behind it, the discipline that comes, and the time it takes is going to be there. It will reduce, or it has reduced in terms of how fast we can come to market, and that is important. But it's still not, I have a thought in my head, in a week's time I have this product out. We're far away from that.
Do you think the C-suite understands that? Like, how is generative AI in their strategies this year?
I think it varies a lot across companies, and I'll share maybe 2 things internally that we do to have our C-suite engaged and aware and up to date. So we do monthly technology briefings with our C-suite, and Juan actually coordinates and drives these. So we get our best global technical talent and share kind of the realities of where different technologies are, right? Are they, you hear all kinds of stuff about quantum compute, less lately because Gen AI is still in the spotlight, but quantum compute's a few years out from being commercially viable. So we talk through with them what's current, what's coming, what's a few years out, and we do that regularly to keep the C-suite up to date. And then around generative AI and AI and specifically, we actually have two sets of initiatives. We have a set of initiatives aimed internally at how can we become more productive, looking at our supply chain, at our finance organization, et cetera, and how do we improve the productivity of our own teammates. So we have a set of initiatives around that to find the right use cases. And then, and it's kind of what I alluded to at the opening, we have a set of what are the right use cases where we should engage with customers around AI, and we're working through both of those. And we're treating them both with regular reviews and where are we, what are the use cases, and so we're making a very purposeful effort to keep the C-suite engaged and grounded amidst all the hype, because people get pretty excited about this stuff, and our CEO is pretty excited about AI.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that because we do that internally, but that doesn't happen with all the customers as well, right? So there's always, we see that gap in there, and that is why when we go and talk to them, we have to say, yep, that's great, you read it here, but that's not how it works. This is how it works. It's going to take this much time. This is what you can expect out of a solution like this. The other aspect that I always bring up is the technology. If you've looked like generative AI or any technology these days, is changing so fast and upgrading so fast that it's not that the next feature that they want is going to be 2 years away. It might be 2 months away. So you have to start on that journey and believe that the features that you want are going to be available to you, or the capability that you require to build those features is going to be available to you in a short amount of time. So you have to start on that journey. It's going to be there. Like I've seen that in the last 6 months, where I tried something, it's like, it's still not there. And in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I see an update, and it's like, oh, now it's there. Now I can start building on top of it, right? So it's really fast. It's happening, and then the focus falls on us to keep updated with all the stuff that's changing, and ensure that we understand the changes, we use those changes, implement those changes, so we know what are the limitations, so that we can provide that value back to our customers.
One last segue about managing expectations. Juan, I've heard you say this before about the wow of the demo is easy. Do you want to explain that?
Sure. So these AI models generate amazing results, and that's why everybody's so excited about it. And you can create images really easily. You can create text that sounds plausible very easily. So it's really easy to demo something that's just going to wow you. But productizing that so that it's got the cost controls, it's got the security controls, that is consumable by the community that you're trying to expose these capabilities to, does not, it follows the same rules that we've always followed in IT for the last 50, 60 years. It just takes time. You have to iterate through it. You have to secure it. You have to make sure you put boundaries around it, access controls, all the traditional stuff. So productizing something from a demo to real production usage does take time. And that's actually why we saw most of 2023, a lot of POCs, very few production rollouts. We believe 2024 will be the time when we actually see production rollouts.
How do we make this easier for companies to embrace? Because we're all convinced that this is a game changer. So how do we make this easier to get results?
So I think this is where, when we come up with these accelerators and frameworks coming out of the innovation group, that's the starting point for our customers. So when we are putting it out for our practices to use and deploy for our customers, it's production-ready code that we can deploy, right? So then they can have a good foundation. The customers have a good foundation to build upon, and then they can build their own use cases on top of that.
Yeah.
And otherwise, if you start building everything from scratch, all the experience that is required to make sure that you don't get into those security issues or hallucinations and everything else that we've run into and taken care of, they'll have to do that again.
We've made the mistakes for
We've made
you,
the mistakes for them. So,
Carm, what would you add?
Yeah, I was going to add, really just think about it. And we've been talking about it a little bit, but it basically is about the business conversation. So it's about what are the expectations, what's the outcome, what's the business impact? Because we've been doing AI and, I don't want to date myself, but I've been doing it since the early 90s. And I think there was a bit of a miss on the delivering on the expectations of what AI could do for us. And we went into what was called the AI winter. Well, we're back again. It's not new. We're using AI. It's a large language model. It's a different concept. But I think what we have to do is we really have to look at it from the perspective of what is it that we expect to accomplish by using these capabilities? And then how are we going to do it in an effective way? And as Amol pointed out, we want to make sure that we can deliver speed to value. We want to make sure that we can deliver accuracy and trustworthiness as we go. And that's really a part of what we want to do. So if we are looking at it from the perspective of, let's understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. Let's understand how it is that you would do that, and then demonstrate the viability of this by using the IP that we bring to the table, as Amol was talking about. And then I think is how we can really help organizations understand how to create impactful use cases, but also look at the future in terms of how do they continue to add to this to make them more successful over time. So adoption is really a key part of that. And I think we are really in the driver's seat to help organizations understand the technology because of, as Mike was talking about earlier and Juan, there's this huge hype cycle where people are just like, oh, it's magic, right? Well, not so much. We have to apply discipline. We have to apply really practical experience to how we're going to implement these solutions and then do it in a fast and effective way.
So rapid fire round to close things out, and we'll go from the phone to the room. We talked a lot about generative AI, so I'm curious, what do you think are more of like the sleeper tech trends that we'll see this year? What's getting missed? Juan, you kick us off.
So outside of generative AI or any of these AI capabilities, I suspect that this year will be, with Apple's recent introduction of the VR goggles, it's going to be a re-engagement of that hype cycle. And we might actually see some change in that space. There's been a lot of investment from the industry in that side of the house. It's been overshadowed by AI, but that much money is being spent. Pretty good indicator that something's going to come out of it. Might be on the consumer side alone, but it might actually change how we do business as well.
Carm?
All right. I hate to be the geek in the room, and Juan kind of stole mine. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't really steal it, but I would agree with him 100%. But I would say data fabric, data virtualization, access to data wherever it lives. I think we're going to start to see technologies that allow us to get at our data from using these kind of mesh or fabric technologies and be able to use that to be able to augment our AI capabilities across the board. And I would also almost say that because of the responsible AI concepts that are coming into play, I don't want to add two of them, but no one likes me to talk about blockchain, but I think blockchain actually might come back into this a little bit for those kinds of things where we think about immutable authorization of data assets, as well as tracking lineage and provenance of data, because I think it's going to be important for responsible AI over time.
You, Amol?
So I have a little different take on this. I think that the sleeper technology is not really maybe technology, it's going to be people. So people who have not been engaged on this side of the world in terms of solutions and ideas and how it can solve, all the tech that's currently there is going to empower them to think that way. And that's why we'll see a lot more of different user experiences, applications, type of applications, engagements, and different way of doing things. And that is going to be, for the next 2 years, you'll see people who've never been technical start to think that way, because now it's within their grasp of actually implementing certain things in a much easier way. And then the second is, one part of that, you'll see platforms that will start to spit out applications based on what you want to do. So you could go in and you say, I have this idea, and you put this in, and it'll actually spit out an app for you. And now you can have an app under your name in the marketplace and monetize it. And I have a feeling that that kind of automation is right around the corner. It's going to be fun.
Interesting, yeah. And Mike?
I'll take a little bit of a different spin on it, and rather than picking a technology. I'll talk about the integration of technologies to create new capabilities. So we're working with a different healthcare provider who has hundreds of hospitals and clinics across the country. And imagine you're a surgeon and you're in the middle of a procedure and you run into something you've never seen before and you don't have the expert there in the operating room with you. That can be a big problem for the patient. So we're working with them on trying to figure out, well, there's a whole set of experts and specialists in different medical disciplines in your other hospitals. There's another set in other organizations. There's a set that might be retiring who say, I want to be on call and work 20 hours a week now. How do you integrate a set of technologies, including, potentially VR, to let the remote physician actually see what's going on with the patient? How do you integrate AI to study the history immediately of thousands or tens of thousands of other similar situations and come up with the highest likelihood procedure of success? How do you create, through collaboration technologies, the connection between the different clinicians in that scenario? So I think what's going to be really interesting is how do you connect some of these really powerful individual technologies into a capability that doesn't really exist today.
Interesting. Really interesting, diverse perspectives here. Lots of opportunities ahead for sure. So thank you, gentlemen, for your time today, your insights. I love that we have just a great collaboration of the technical side, the strategy side, really getting the collective view of where businesses are going. We're going to keep following the generative AI journey and share all of our findings along the way. And if you'd like any more information about Insight and what we're doing with generative AI, just visit our website. We'll continue to share our resources. Thank you again. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks
you
for
Jillian.
having us, Jillian.
Thanks, everybody.